Welcome to another sew and chat, only instead of sewing, I'm knitting this time. So I'm working on a blanket and I'll be working on that, and let's see how well I can talk and count knit stitches at the same time. So this may or may not go super well, but I've had something else happen that I wanted to talk about, and I am holed up in my room right now doing this because my kids are all home and yeah, it's loud downstairs. What happened is actually with school in that this coming year is going to be interesting for me in that our principal for the elementary school is retiring at the end of this school year, and that has brought up a whole lot of stuff, and I kind of wanted to talk about it because this is all very relevant for my recovery and healing and all of that. So hopefully I can get this out in a cohesive thought here. 1, 2, 3, 4. See, I'm already not doing super hot. Anyway, I was reminded with her retiring of the start of our elementary school journey with my oldest child quite a few years ago at this point. He is finishing up he just finished up his junior year. So he's going into his final year of high school this fall, which is maybe a little terrifying for me. Over the years, when people find out about my childhood or other survivors have asked me this that are starting the journey or have started the journey after me, as far as putting my kids into public school and how I overcame the fear of that. This is about that, because this was a huge part of my journey in coming away from the cult and the mindset and the fear. So when my oldest son was 4, we moved from across the United States to the city we are in now. Now, I know I've mentioned on the channel that I'm currently in the same state I was raised in and that I grew up in. My husband and I got married here in South Carolina. Well, there was a year of our lives, which is a big part of our journey as a couple, where we moved to Seattle, and we were there for almost a full year, and then we moved back. And there were a lot of reasons why we moved there. There were a lot of reasons we moved back. But the basic short of it was we were homeless in South Carolina. My husband could not find work because he cannot do physical labor, and that was really what was available at the time. And I mean, arguably, depending on where you look, it could still say that there's issues with that, but it is better than it was. But we moved to Seattle because he's into tech, and there's a lot of tech booming out there, and we thought, that was a permanent move. We got out there. I had 2 small children, and we couldn't survive. I didn't have a degree. I don't see how you can make it on a single family income unless you are filthy rich out there. It is so expensive. We had no comprehension for how expensive it was because we had both been raised around South Carolina. And so naively, we met with a realtor while we were out there, and we thought, we'll go look at a house. Just to put this into perspective, we paid half for our current house back in 2019 than what a house that was less than half the size of this house was going for in Seattle back in 2013. And I can only imagine how much worse that is now. And we had 1 vehicle. I really had no way to get a job because we had 2 small children, and my oldest son is autistic. We were on the wait list at the Seattle Children's Hospital. Anyway, we moved to have him diagnosed. Anyway, we moved back here before any of that happened. And partly because my husband is the only surviving child left of my in-laws, and we needed to be here for them. And there were a lot of other reasons, but finances was a big one. And anyway, when we moved back, this is how we landed here. But that is a big element into our schooling, because when we were in Seattle and we picked the house that we were going to rent for the first year here, we didn't know about the areas of this city. This is not where we grew up. We had spent time here dating. Of course, now somebody picks to mow the next door neighbor's yard. But we hadn't lived here. We had just come here as visitors, tourists, I guess, to the city, if you want to label it that. And so we didn't know anything about schools, districts, and any of that. And so we wouldn't have been able to say, oh yeah, this is the school that we want our kids to go to. That wasn't even a registered thought. Our oldest child was not yet in kindergarten age. We just picked the place to rent, and it happened to be zoned for the school that my kids still go to. So that is how we ended up at this particular school. Now, the principal that is retiring this year, when my son started when my son started kindergarten, that was her second year as principal of this elementary school. So that's kind of the timeline that we're looking at here. And I knew that my son was autistic. I knew we were looking down the road of special needs. I had not a foggiest idea of what that looked like. But I will tell you, I was terrified. I have had a lot of questions of people asking me, well, how were you able to do this? How are you not terrified? Let's be clear, I was terrified. So, I grew up in a cult that told me, and parents that told me, that public school was the devil's playground, and that it was the least loving thing you could do to your children to send them to public school. And the only godly option was to homeschool your children. But I'll remind you, I didn't have an education. I had nothing to pull from. My 2.5 years that I went to college after I quote unquote graduated, which shouldn't have. Anyway, weren't enough. I didn't have a degree, and a lot of the credits that I had from my second year and a half, so the last 3 semesters I was in college, were like Bible classes from Pensacola Christian College. So they meant literally nothing in the grand scheme of things, and especially since it wasn't accredited, I didn't know what that was, nor what it meant, nor how important it was when I went there. But sitting through Bible classes isn't going to teach you how to, educate your children. But I was brainwashed for my entire childhood that the only thing I could do if I wanted to raise godly children was homeschool, and that we were better than everyone else because we were homeschooled, and that my parents just loved their children more, all the baloney, and that we were willingly handing them over to the devil if we sent them to public school. And as a young mom, I mentioned it in the last talk video where I talked about the birth situation with my oldest son. It took me a long time to realize how brainwashed I actually was, because I thought I was fine. I didn't even know that I had been raised in a cult for a few years after I got out. It was just, this was what we did. I called it a homeschool organization when talking to my husband about it. He even reminded me of that the other day. I just didn't know. You don't know what you don't know. 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. This is going swimmingly, guys. So I'm trying to maintain a train of thought here and count knitting stitches, and this is going interestingly. But all that to say is, I think a lot of people, when I first started the journey of my kids in school, thought like, I like I said, I got asked, how were you not terrified? So I want to just put this into perspective, into a picture. So we moved to our current city in October of 2013, and my son started kindergarten in August of 2014. And once we got settled from the move and started figuring things out around here, that's when I actually had the mental construct to think, wait a minute, he's going to turn 5. We have to legally make a decision what we're going to do. And I was in already over my head. I knew I was already in over my head. Like, there were many, 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 many days where I just lived in a constant near state of panic, because the kids would be hitting triggers and I didn't know what a trigger was. I didn't know I was being triggered. My husband would come home from work and find me in the fetal position in our closet. I didn't know how to be a good mom, but I knew what kind of mom I didn't want to be. And I felt lost and alone, and the thought of sending my child that clearly was having trouble off to public school was nightmare inducing, literally. And those last 6 months leading up to him starting, my husband could tell you, there wasn't a day that I wasn't in a constant state of panic attacks. I was having near nightly nightmares, and it was something to overcome, because I was fighting against a lifetime of brainwashing and didn't know it. And all I knew was, I love my boy. I can't be his teacher. I don't have the patience for that. Plus, I don't have the education for that. We can't afford private school, thank goodness. I wouldn't want them in private school at all. But anyway, we couldn't afford it, and in my brain at the time, it was, well, at least, it would be not public school. And, yeah. I'm sitting here talking about it in a really nonchalant way, but let me tell you, there was nothing nonchalant. I've had 5 kids start there now, and 2 have left that school and are now in high school. So the place I'm speaking from now is just recollection of what it was like, and it was horrible. And I cannot tell you the level of absolute terror I was living under leading up to him starting. And it's one of those things that makes me say, I guarantee you that my parents had no actual love for me or any of my siblings, because I understand brainwashing and that brainwashing works. But as a parent that genuinely loves your child, there has to be a catch in yourself that says, this is not what's good for my child. Okay, goodness, I had to stop, and I don't know where I left off, so I'm back now. But I was sitting down and writing a letter to the principal, just congratulating her on her retirement and thanking her for everything she's done for my family. And I was sobbing by the end of it, just because remembering where I was as a first-time mom sending a child to public school. All the firsts that he went through, they were firsts for me. His first field trip, his first, all of this stuff. And I still have a relationship with Jesus that looks far different than what I was raised under. And so I fully believe that he placed us where he did. And the staff at the school that my boys are at is like, they were absolutely phenomenal. And I know that is not the story for everybody, especially with special needs. South Carolina is one of the lower states in the United States for education. and so I'm fully aware of that everybody's experience is different. I'm just telling my experience. And there for a while, I knew a few people with other special needs children that didn't have a good experience in the same school system. And I didn't feel free to talk about my good experience for a while because theirs wasn't, but their situation was completely different. And I figured out that their not good situation is valid, and they should talk about it because things do need to improve in the public school system, especially for special needs kids. But my story was also valid in that, and my good experience is also valid, and I'm allowed to tell it. And this principal, I think, was 100% responsible for who she surrounded herself with, and everybody at that school that set my children on such an amazing trajectory for school that I couldn't have even fathomed. The team at that school, the IEP team, just came around our entire family, not just my son, and gave him and us an amazing elementary school experience. And it is like, he raved about school so much when he started that he made my daughter, who was 2 years behind him, jealous for 2 years that he got to go to school and she had to wait. And the two high schoolers that are those two kids now still tell their younger brothers that they're so lucky to be at the school that they are, because they both have such fond memories of that school and loved it so much. So again, I'm not saying like everybody's story is different, and but this is mine, and this is not saying that things don't need to change for special needs families. There was a lot that we did still have to fight for, but I didn't feel alone in fighting for it. And the teachers just loved on him. We have loved almost every single one of the teachers that my children have all gotten, and now I have 3 more at that school, and the twins are in different classes. So even though the 2 youngest ones are twins, they have different teachers. I don't know if the new principal is going to do that or not. And I'm not going to lie, I don't know this principal, and there is a little bit of fear creeping back in, because a principal can change the entire atmosphere of a school. And I just, it's change. My son doesn't handle change well. I don't handle change well. I felt like I needed to bring this up because, like I said, so many people have asked me how I wasn't terrified to send my kids to school. And the real answer to that is, I think I've made clear, is I absolutely was. Every decision that I have made that actively stepped away from the brainwashing that I grew up in, and actively stepped away from the cult, and actively stepped away from everything I knew to be true, in quotations, because it wasn't true, was terrifying and had physical consequences to me. But they were worth it because I was making those decisions to change the future for my children, and to break the cycles of the past. It is a nuanced conversation for public school. I get that. Which is why I will stand by. I don't have a problem with private school. I don't have a problem with public school. I don't have a problem with homeschool. If that is the decision that you feel is best for your child, not best for you. And that is where I will. That's the hill I'm going down. Because you don't make, like, children are not commodities to just, like, oh my gosh. This is, my children did not choose to be brought into this world. I chose to bring them here. And it is my responsibility to do everything that I can that's best for them. They shouldn't have to ask for it. They shouldn't have to beg for it. They shouldn't have, like, I was denied an education because my parents were terrified of public school. And a whole lot of other reasons as well. But I didn't get a choice in the matter. And as my children have hit things, hit certain milestones, that's the word I'm looking for, milestones throughout school, I still have to fight triggers and anger that flares up with my parents because of what I was denied. As an example, we were taking a tour of the school prior to my daughter's 8th grade year in middle school. Obviously, she's now in high school, but this was a couple of years ago. And she was in honors English. And we were talking to the English teacher, and she was going through all of the things that they were going to be doing with the students that year. And one of the things was they were going to be reading through To Kill a Mockingbird, and then they were going to do, I think they were going to have a lawyer come in and talk to the kids, and they were going to do some type of mock trial where the students were going to learn how to do that. And I just remember, like, going from, wow, oh my gosh, this is fascinating, to an all-out panic that my husband picked up on, where I couldn't breathe and I needed to get out of the room. And thankfully it was the last class that we were in for the tour before we were leaving to go home. And the rage that boiled up in me was instantaneous and so explosive that I had to get out of there. And I just got home and punched the pillow. And it was like, I love learning. And this was a moment that I had to feel. Like, I wanted to scream into their faces. Like, I love learning, and you killed that. You denied me of this. And sure, I understand that my life isn't over. You know, I'm early 40s, but I still have 5 children, which right now they are my top priority, and they should be my top priority, you know. And so, you know, maybe one day, but right now it is taking everything out of me to be a mother, because I personally believe that trauma survivors should be counted as, should get some level of at least, like, recognized disability. And I'm not talking about necessarily funds, other than just, like, this is a legitimate disability for me. It has been, and I had to fight that because I didn't want it to be a disability to me. But fighting against years of trauma and trying to breaking those cycles is very difficult. And not that beating and starving my children, and not beating and not starving my children was not difficult. That's not what I'm talking about. It was so easy to not physically abuse them. But I'm talking about all of it. Like that year leading up to my son starting kindergarten, I was non-functional. That level of trauma that I was living through and reliving through and fighting against to make a better world for my son took me out. Like, I look back and I'm like, I am so grateful that my oldest 2 children loved playing with each other and had great imaginations, because they had to play with each other a lot that year, because I wasn't able to do much because I was living in a panic attack. Anyway, like I said, this hit my head because our principal is retiring and I might be a little scared about the new one. But we have 3 years left at the elementary school at this point, and I'm sure it'll be fine. And if it's not, then we'll cross that bridge together. But this is something I haven't really discussed much and talked about much, but I have been asked about, because it is hard to overcome that level of fear and brainwashing. But again, it was what I knew I needed to do for my children, and I don't know how else to explain it. Have an extremely supportive husband that was helping me through all of this to the best of his abilities. All of this was so foreign to him. He just spent a lot of the first few years of our marriage raising his eyebrows and looking at me when I would say something, and he's like, that's not true, Erica, that's not true. No, that's not how the way it is. And like, I argued with him a lot. I'm like, well, yeah, it is. He's like, no, it's not. That is definitely helpful. So anyway, this is something I wanted to talk about, and I will add a few things because I can already hear it, because I've been literally getting this argument for years out of anybody that wants to. Well, I finished a row, so I'm going to pause really quick since I'm showing this off. I'm making this for a friend who she and her husband just had their first baby, and yeah, I hope I will get it done before it starts getting cold. We're at the beginning of summer, so I have all summer to work on it, but it's so pretty. I love anyway, the pattern itself uses 2 strands, so I've crocheted a lot of things that have required 2 strands before, but I'm newer to knitting, and this is the second blanket I've made out of this book that has done this, so this is the second project, but from these 2 were the first 2 things I've knitted that you knit with 2 strands. So it's interesting. But the first one I made out of this book was another baby blanket that went to another friend that had a baby. But this one is this pattern. It's called Tea Time. And I just love it's for a little boy, and it's so pretty. And I think that that'll look really pretty with the marbled yarn here. So anyway, that's the blanket I'm making. I successfully got a row done. So anyway, I might start another one. But yeah, I felt this video was important just because I feel like a lot of, I don't know, I don't want to speak for people. For me, going through that, there wasn't anyone that I knew that had gone through that. I was in absolute brand new territory. I was walking ground that no one I knew had walked. I tried to separate myself as much as possible, and that's one of the reasons that we moved to Seattle in the first place, was we were getting out of the city. We were getting out of Columbia, which is where I was raised. And when we moved back to South Carolina, I told my husband he would never get me back into Columbia again. And I'm grateful that we found a place where we did, and he got the job he did. But for my own sanity, I guess, I was already, I hadn't mentally processed, yes, ATI is a cult. I had not processed, oh goodness, I was raised in a cult. I knew that my childhood was not good. I knew that my parents had been abusive, but I was still in contact with my parents at this point. So you also have to understand, my parents still had, when Matt and I got married, they still had 5 of my younger siblings that were minors. And then there's a whole part of my story where I ended up reporting them to DSS, and we helped my 2 youngest sisters escape, and then they still had my 2 youngest brothers. And I had a social, I took my son and my daughter, that was an infant at the time, down to the DSS office several times to make statement after statement, and I did it quietly. I wasn't trying to make a big deal about it. I didn't go around Columbia blasting, hey, I reported my parents to DSS. I didn't talk about it. I was ashamed that I even had to do it. Like, the day I reported them, that was another panic attack. Like, I went straight onto a panic attack and had a migraine for 3 days that did not lift. That was one of the most hardest things, I know that that's not correct English, but I had done to that date. Because as much as they were abusive, and I knew that they were abusive, there was a part of me that still wanted to believe that they meant well. And I was actively trying to push the trauma of my childhood down, because I was just trying to focus on Matt and my children. And we had a lot of crappy things externally from my extended family hit us during the first few years of our marriage that I didn't even have the ability to process the trauma of childhood yet. I was in active stuff it down, move on mode. Like, I will not address this. I'm not even going to think about it. Like, I have a baby and a toddler, and that is what I'm focused on. And a husband. I don't want to forget Matt. He's amazing. And so at the time leading up to me starting our oldest son in public school for kindergarten, my parents still had my two youngest brothers. And because, spoiler, they didn't lose custody of my two youngest brothers, even though I had a social worker look me in the face and say, we actually have enough on your parents to put in an emergency order and remove the boys today. We're not going to. And I just remember staring blankly at her for a while with my infant and toddlers sitting right there going, why? Because I was trying to get them. Like, I had a husband and a house, and I knew how to raise kids. Like, I was trying to get them. I wasn't trying to get them in the system. And I had practically raised those two boys anyway. That I had told people for years those were my two first boys, my youngest brothers. And so, and all I remember her saying was that my parents had so successfully isolated them that they felt it would be more detrimental to expose them to new things than it would be to just leave them in the house. And like, I will never forget that feeling of utter and complete defeat when I went home that day. Like, there have been few times where I have been that level of defeated feeling, because I knew that my parents were manipulative, A. B, I knew that they knew I was the one that reported them, and that they immediately delved into using my brothers as weapons to get what they could out of me, and withholding me of the ability to see them, to talk to them, and I couldn't protect them anymore. So, and I had given myself the job over the years as their protector. And that showed up in many forms. Nobody told me, just as oldest sister, that's what I decided. So anyway, when we moved back from Seattle, my parents still were barely letting me see my brothers at the time. And we were back for a couple of months before I was allowed to see them at all. And, spoiler, I reported them to DSS. I guess I couldn't expect those abusers to do anything else. But so that is where I was, like, in life and in trauma recovery. Let's just say no trauma recovery had happened at that point. When I was at this point to put my son in school. So, this is prior to trauma therapy. This is, like, I had seen counselors for a good portion of the years of our marriage. This year in Seattle was the only year I didn't actively see someone for counseling, because I knew I was messed up. But I hadn't actually had trauma therapy yet. I didn't associate my childhood with trauma yet. I didn't know what a trauma trigger was at the time. Like, this is how early in my life, and I didn't know I was living in them. I didn't know the things that my children were doing were actively triggering my trauma response. I had no framework for this. I had no mental construct for this. I still was completely ignorant. Like, I knew that Bill Gothard was kind of messed up and HI was kind of messed up, but like, it was one of those, I still believed, like, well, you know, there were some good things. Some people just took it too far. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It was a couple more years down the road before I started to realize there was no baby in that bathwater. It was pure rotten to the core. And so, like, we're still early into that. And I'm supposed to send my son off to public school like everybody else and be fine with it. And I wasn't fine with it. And I was an absolute destroyed emotional mess. All I can say is, again, is I knew that I couldn't. I could not homeschool him, and I knew that. And I knew it wouldn't be fair to him to do that. And I also knew it wouldn't be fair to me. Like, this is a personal thing, I wanted to be his mom, not his teacher. And I didn't want those lines to cross, because those lines crossing growing up for me had been absolutely horrible. I wasn't interested in that. And I am just incredibly grateful that things for us worked the way they did, and that I believe God put the people in place that He did to surround my family and my son. And, you know, within a couple of weeks of him starting school, I watched that child march into the front door with more confidence as a 5-year-old than I had at that time as a 30-year-old. I think I was 30. I don't remember. I had to have been at least 30. I'm not doing that math right now. Maybe I was still late 20s. No, because I was 24 when he was born. So, you know what? I was 25. 29. Anyway, whatever. Wasn't yet 30. But point being, it's like, that is just one step that I did as a mom to break cycles that was hard. But none of them have been, like, questioning everything you thought you knew, questioning everything that you believed, that you thought to be true, isn't fun. Even if it's bad stuff, it's what you know. And there's a level of grief that comes with acknowledging that everything you know is wrong. Everything you thought you knew was wrong. Because then you have to acknowledge that you don't know. And you have to figure out what you have to learn. And you have to be willing to learn. And it's been a hard journey. A good one. I'd do it all over again for my precious children. But it's not easy. And I wish, as a younger mother, I had been able to find others. I got interrupted there by a 7-year-old, but I wish as a younger mother there had been more people talking and telling their stories, because if I had thought that anybody understood what I was living and what I was trying to figure out, it would have been so helpful. Yeah, this is the big reason why I wanted to start talking and start putting these videos out, is because I'm just really hoping that it might encourage someone else, because I know that there are a lot of us, and I know that HEI isn't the only conservative cult that, you know, demonized public school. There's a lot of them out there, actually. But I also just want, you know, anyone like me to know that you're not alone. And if you're terrified to do it, that's normal, I feel like. At least it was for me. But I hope that you don't let that fear stop you from doing what is best for your children, because it's worth doing the scary thing for them. And you're not alone. There's a lot of people that have been through stuff like this, and I can sit on this side of it here with my son only having 1 year left of high school and say, even with a few bad years in middle school, that it was worth it. Anyway, I don't know how choppy this video is, and I'm kind of sorry if it is, and also not sorry. Like, I'm starting this journey of, like, I've been publicly telling my story for a while, but talking to a camera about it is a little different. Sometimes I feel like I would do better if I had somebody here asking me a question and I was answering it. Not because I'm not afraid to talk about it. I'm not shy to talk about it. You know, most of the time, like, with all the trauma therapy and years of trauma therapy that I have had, I'm able to compartmentalize it and talk about it. Most of the time it doesn't catch me emotionally unless I'm like in a moment. And I know it sounds bad, but I can talk about all of these horrific details about what happened and what my parents did without it affecting me the way it used to. So, like, shoot, I've finished writing my book and it's in an editor right now, and I'm working on getting that published. So I'm not shy about talking about it, but sometimes talking to a camera just randomly, that's why I've been putting it off and why I haven't really talked about it before, is because it kind of feels weird and odd, and sometimes I don't know where to start or where to finish. So, but this hit my head because it's relevant. It's something I'm going through right now. I might be feeling a little bit of the feels as we lose the principal that has meant so much to me, and that has, I feel like, been a humongous part in the responsibility of my oldest being as successful as he has been. Like, yes, he has 1 year left of school before he graduates, but I mean, he's doing fantastic. There's no reason he's not gonna make it. Have a rising senior. I'm still struggling with how I feel about that. He signed up for driver's ed in a month, and while I am not the mom that wants to go back in time, the most I want to go back in time is sometimes I pull up pictures of especially my oldest two, because they're my teenagers, when they were babies, and I remember how destroyed of a mother they had. And I cry for what those two had to live through and learn. But you know what? They are two of the most amazing humans that I know, and I am incredibly privileged to get to be their mom. This is where I'm gonna cry. And they have shown me grace and forgiveness in a way that I didn't know existed. They're a huge part of how I learned that, and they've been with me through almost the beginning of this, and it's mind-boggling to me that my oldest son is on the cusp of adulthood, and I'm so freaking proud of him. He has overcome so much, and he has done so much, and he doesn't have the top scores in his class, but I don't care. We tell him and all the kids all the time that I don't care about their grade. I just want to see them try, and I want to know that they tried their hardest and their best. And so yeah, there are some emotions right now, but it's because I just wrote a 4-page handwritten letter to the principal congratulating her on her retirement, and also telling her thank you and giving her a little bit of this backstory, because of all these years that she's worked with my family and my kids. You know, I wasn't talking about my childhood back then, and my son has not been in that school for a long time, so we haven't. None of my other ones are autistic. None of my other ones have had a lot of the issues that required the IEPs and all of that. So we just haven't been there and seen her and talked as much since I actually started talking about my story. And it also hasn't really been relevant. But in light of her retiring, I wanted to tell her thank you. And So I had a pile of tissues beside that when I finished that letter to her, dropped it off last week. Then, you know, my daughter just finished her freshman year and my son just finished his junior year, and next year is going to be a big year. My middle son is starting his 5th grade year this fall. So, you know, this coming year is going to be the last of a few things, and then we're going to have a graduate, and then we're going to have another child in middle school, and the twins are going to be the only ones in elementary school. So we're at a transition point, and it can be emotional. But I think a lot of the emotions, again, are I'm not the parent that would like to go back in time. I do not want to relive and go back to babies again. But I am emotional because I am so immensely proud of my children. And also maybe a little bit terrified of my son driving. So there's that. But anyway, I appreciate those of you who have stuck around for however ridiculously long this video probably is, how choppy and maybe non-cohesive it is. But you know, I think the more I do it, probably the easier it'll get and the more concise I might be able to get. But if I wait until I have my ability to tell my story to a camera down to a science, I will never tell it. And I believe it is extremely important for me to tell it. So I appreciate you, and I don't know how often these will come out. Again, tomorrow's the last day of school for the summer, and I will have all the kids home all day. Well, except for there is a few things, but anyway, there's gonna be kids, and I have some plans with them that I had for last summer that ended up not happening because of all the pain I was in. Surgery, if you've been around here, you know, that started, and now that I feel almost back to myself again, I have some plans. My almost 11-year-old wants to learn how to cook. My daughter has begged to take over the kitchen a few times, and I am all about that if she wants to take over the kitchen. And my son needs to drive. So as terrified as I am of it, he's got to learn because he's graduating next year. But as of right now, I need to get off and stop yapping because I've got to go make a chocolate chip cookie cake for said oldest son of mine who just turned 17, and we're having his party this weekend. So I have a 17-year-old. How in the heck did that happen? I will see you in the next video.